Okay, so um, let's dive into something that I think we can all relate to, maybe a little bit reluctantly, performance reviews.
Yeah.
You know those annual meetings where your work kind of gets put under the microscope?
Yeah. I think we've all been there.
But what if I told you there's this whole world of different performance management strategies out there, and some are even like ditching that whole yearly review thing?
Yeah, it's true. The landscape of performance management is it's changing, and it's pretty fascinating how it's all evolving.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to be kind of taking a deep dive into today. We're going to be using excerpts from a business textbook to understand not just like what these strategies are, but also how they've kind of evolved and what the real impact is, both for companies and for you as an employee,
Right.
because it affects all of us.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be looking at everything from, those traditional methods like performance appraisals, management by objectives, to some of the newer trends like having more frequent check-ins and even the role of data analytics.
So before we kind of go too far, I think it'd be helpful to define like what exactly is performance management, because it can sound kind of, well, corporate-y, right?
Yeah, you're right. It can sound a little bit intimidating. But at its core, it's really about helping both the company, like the organization as a whole, and the individuals within the company perform better.
Okay.
It's about how you link the company's big goals, their overall objectives, with what each employee is working towards on a daily or weekly basis.
Okay.
So the thinking is, if everyone's doing well individually, then the business itself should thrive too.
Okay, so it's not just about making sure, like, as an employee, you're hitting your targets. It's also about making sure that those targets actually contribute to the company's success.
Exactly. It's about making sure that everyone is aligned. And what's interesting is that some companies are actually moving away from traditional performance reviews because they don't see them as very effective in this fast-paced world we're living in.
Really. Like ditching the annual review.
Mm-hmm.
I have to admit, part of me is like, yes.
Yeah.
But then the other part of me is like, oh, that's kind of scary.
Yeah. It's a mixed bag for sure. We'll get into the pros and cons a little bit later, but for now, let's look at a classic performance management tool that's actually seen a bit of a resurgence lately, and that's management by objectives, or MBO.
Okay. MBO, that does sound familiar. Now, didn't Peter Drucker like come up with that way back in the day?
He did. It was back in 1954, to be exact.
Wow.
And it's pretty fascinating how relevant it still is today, especially with the rise of remote work.
Yeah, so what is it about MBO that works so well, even like, almost 70 years later?
Yeah.
Like, how does it actually, play out in a company?
So the core idea is that managers and employees, they work together to set these goals. So it's not the goals just being dictated like from the top down. It's more of a collaborative process.
Mhm.
And these goals, they're specific to the employee's role, but they also link back to the company's larger objectives.
Okay, so it's not just about like telling people what to do. It's about involving them in the process of setting those individual goals that then kind of feed into the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Sure.
It gives employees a sense of, ownership and autonomy, and that can be really motivating. Plus, it helps ensure that everybody's efforts are aligned, which, that reduces the chances of people working at cross purposes.
Okay. No, I see the value in that. Especially now, I think even more so in like a remote environment where it's easy to feel disconnected from, what the company's overall mission is. But let's be real, no system is perfect.
Mm.
What are some of the potential drawbacks to MBO?
Yeah, for sure. Well, one thing to consider is that MBO can be pretty time consuming. Think about it.
Yeah.
You've got meetings to set those goals, you've got regular check-ins to track progress, and then you've got the process of actually formally evaluating whether the objectives were actually met.
Right.
So it can be a lot of back and forth.
That's a lot of meetings. And I'm also thinking like if every employee is hitting those objectives, are companies then going to be bombarded with, you know, requests for raises and promotions? Because that could get expensive pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a very valid concern. And it's all about finding that sustainable approach and aligning expectations. And, it's important to remember, too, that MBO might not be the right fit for every type of employee or even every company culture.
Okay, so MBO has its pluses and minuses. But it's interesting that something that was developed, so long ago is
Yeah.
still relevant today. So let's talk about like the elephant in the room,
Okay.
the dreaded performance appraisal.
Yeah.
What exactly is it and how
Yeah.
does it usually work?
Well, a performance appraisal is a formal assessment of an employee's work over a specific period of time, usually 6 or 12 months. So think of it like a structured report card for your job.
Oh, I definitely had some report cards I'd rather forget about.
Right.
And I imagine it's the same with some of those performance
Ah.
reviews, especially if, like, things haven't been going so well.
Yeah, they can definitely be nerve-wracking, but ideally they shouldn't be about making people, feel judged. They
Really?
should serve a few important purposes.
Like what? I always think of them as like who gets a raise and who doesn't.
Well, that's certainly one aspect of it, but it's much broader than that.
Okay.
A well-executed performance appraisal, it actually provides some really valuable feedback, both positive and constructive. And that helps the employee, understand their strengths and also identify those areas for growth. They also help the company as a whole track overall employee performance, which then that can help inform decisions about training needs and resource allocation. And yeah, they do also play a role in determining things like promotions and compensation.
Okay, so it's about having like this formal system in place to kind of evaluate how everyone's doing and make sure
Yeah.
that they're on the right track. But you mentioned earlier that some companies are moving away from those annual reviews. Why is that?
Well, there's a growing trend to ditch the annual appraisal and instead to replace it with more frequent informal check-ins.
Okay.
And, companies like Dell, Microsoft, IBM, they've already made this switch.
I'm so curious about this because that seems like such a big change. Like, what are the benefits to having, more frequent feedback versus that, like one big kind of scary conversation once a year?
Yeah, the thinking is that in today's world, waiting a whole year to address issues or even just to recognize achievements, it's just not as effective.
It's kind of like, if you're going on a road trip and you only check your map once a year,
Right.
you need to be constantly adjusting course based on the traffic, the road conditions, all of that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so these frequent check-ins, they allow for just that. They create a much more dynamic and responsive approach to performance management.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like a more natural way to manage performance, especially when, things are constantly changing. But doesn't that also create a lot more work for managers? Like, isn't that a huge time commitment to be having all these little check-ins all the time?
It can be, for sure. And that is one of the criticisms of this approach. And we'll dive into some of those challenges and how companies are addressing them in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Before we move on, though, can you just give us a really quick overview of the different methods used for performance appraisals?
Sure. There are a few common approaches. One is the essay method, and that's basically where the manager keeps kind of like a running journal of observations about the employee's work, throughout the year. So think of it like a detailed performance diary.
So it's not about like remembering everything right before the review. It's about kind of documenting things as they go.
Exactly. Exactly. Then there's what's called the critical incident method. And this is similar, but it focuses more on recording specific instances of like exceptionally good or bad performance.
Okay, so like imagine like a salesperson that, goes above and beyond to secure this huge deal, or on the flip side, someone who makes a critical error that like, costs the company a client.
Right.
Those would be critical incidents worth documenting.
Exactly. That's it. It helps capture those standout moments that really highlight, strengths or areas for improvement. And then finally, there's the comparison method. And this is where employees are ranked based on predetermined criteria and often using like a numerical rating scale.
This one sounds a little bit like those school ranking systems where everyone is kind of pitted against each other.
Right.
Isn't that a bit harsh?
It can be if it's not done carefully. It definitely has its pros and cons, which, we can discuss a bit further later on. But the point is that there are various methods that companies use to evaluate employee performance.
Okay.
And the effectiveness of any method really comes down to one key factor:
And that is?
clear communication.
Okay.
Employees need to know exactly what's expected of them, and they need to know how their performance is going to be measured. Without that clarity, any appraisal system, no matter how sophisticated it is just bound to fail.
It's like if you don't know what the rules of the game are, you can't really play it effectively.
Right, you can't win if you don't know what winning looks like.
Exactly.
Welcome back to our deep dive into performance management.
We've been unpacking a lot from the ins and outs of management by objectives to kind of the evolution of the traditional performance appraisal.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how these concepts they're constantly evolving, but that core purpose, it really stays the same. It's to improve performance, both for the company and for, the individuals.
And this isn't just for, managers or business owners. These are concepts that can apply, to all aspects of life, from, personal projects to career goals to really anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether you're, leading a team or working on a solo venture or just trying to, level up your skills, understanding these concepts, these ideas of performance management can really be a game changer.
You mentioned earlier that some companies are ditching those annual reviews for these more frequent check-ins. But that sounds like a logistical nightmare for managers.
Yeah.
How are companies actually making that work?
Well, it's not just about increasing the frequency of the conversations. It's really about shifting the entire culture around feedback.
Okay.
So it's about making feedback this ongoing, integrated part of the workflow rather than this separate formal event.
Okay, so instead of having that one big, potentially awkward, performance review once a year, it's about having these smaller, maybe more casual check-ins throughout the year.
Precisely. Think of it like, having a quick sync up with your manager maybe every week or two, just to touch base on, what's going well, what challenges are you facing, and how you can kind of support each other.
Okay, I can see how that would be less intimidating than a formal sit-down review.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that also create just a lot more work for managers?
Yeah.
It seems like it could get really overwhelming pretty quickly.
It can be, and to be honest, it does require a shift in mindset for both the managers and the employees.
Okay.
So managers need to be more proactive about scheduling these check-ins and actually making them a priority. And employees need to be prepared to give and receive feedback in this more informal, ongoing way.
So it's not just about changing the frequency of the feedback, but it's actually about changing the entire approach and culture around it.
Exactly. It's about creating this culture of transparency and open communication and continuous improvement. And, it's important to note that this approach doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of all formal performance reviews.
Okay.
Some companies, they still have an annual review process, but they're using it more as a summary of the ongoing feedback and the development conversations that have been happening throughout the year.
Okay, so it's not like an either situation.
Right.
It's about finding a balance that works for the company and its employees. But even with these more frequent check-ins, I still imagine giving and receiving feedback effectively can be tricky.
You're absolutely right. Feedback is a powerful tool, but it can be tricky to navigate, and it's all too easy for that feedback to be misconstrued or even for it to backfire and create tension rather than growth.
Oh yeah, I've definitely been on the receiving end of some feedback that left me feeling more deflated than inspired. So let's talk about how to do feedback right. What are some key principles to keep in mind?
Well, one of the most important things is to be specific. Vague feedback like you need to be more proactive, that's not really helpful.
Right.
Instead, really try to focus on those specific behaviors or situations.
So instead of saying, just great job, you might say, I really appreciated how you handled that client meeting. You were well prepared, you asked insightful questions, and you clearly articulated our value proposition.
Exactly. That kind of specific feedback, that's much more impactful because it tells the person exactly what they did well and how it made a difference. And the same goes for, constructive feedback. Instead of saying, your communication needs work, you might say, I noticed that you didn't keep the team updated on the progress of that project. In the future, I'd appreciate it if you could send a weekly update email outlining your progress and any roadblocks that you're facing.
Okay, so it's about being clear, being direct,
Yeah.
but without being accusatory or judgmental.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also really important to be timely with your feedback. The sooner you can give that feedback, the more relevant and the more impactful it's going to be. Don't wait until the annual review to bring up something that happened, 6 months ago. Address it as soon as possible while it's still fresh in everyone's mind.
Yeah, and I imagine that's even more important with those more frequent check-ins. You don't want to be holding on to this feedback for weeks on end, waiting for that next formal meeting.
Right. And when you are giving feedback, it's essential to be mindful of your tone and your delivery.
Okay.
Feedback should be a collaborative conversation, not a lecture or a reprimand.
So even when you're delivering, constructive criticism, it's important to do it in a way that's supportive and encouraging.
Exactly. Frame the feedback as an opportunity for growth, not a personal attack. And remember to listen actively.
Hmm.
Give the person receiving the feedback the space to respond, to ask questions, to share their perspective.
Okay, so giving feedback is a skill in itself.
Hmm.
It's not just about what you say, but it's about how you say it. But what about receiving feedback? I think we've all been in those situations where we've gotten defensive or taken the feedback personally, even if it was well-intentioned.
It's natural to feel a bit defensive when you're receiving feedback, especially if it's critical. But try to approach it, with an open mind and a willingness to learn. Remember, that feedback is an opportunity for growth. It's a chance to see yourself from a different perspective and to identify those areas where you can improve.
So instead of getting like upset or shutting down, try to see it as this valuable source of information that can help you grow.
Exactly. And if you're unsure about something, don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. It's much better to get that clarification than to kind of stew over something that you didn't fully understand.
And it's also okay to disagree with the feedback, right?
Yes.
Like you don't have to blindly accept everything that you're told.
Absolutely. If you have a different perspective, share it, but, do it respectfully, but try to focus on understanding the other person's viewpoint and finding common ground.
So it's about having a constructive conversation, not a battle of wills.
Exactly. And remember, feedback is a two-way street. Don't just wait for your manager to give you feedback.
Yep.
Seek it out from your colleagues, from your clients, from anyone you work with. The more perspectives you can gather, the better you're going to understand your strengths and your areas for development.
This has been really helpful. I think we often focus so much on like the mechanics of performance management, the systems and processes that we forget about, like the human element.
Right.
Feedback is a conversation. It's not just a task to check off a list.
You're absolutely right. And that human element, it's essential for creating that culture where feedback is valued, it's embraced, and it's used as a tool for growth. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about another crucial aspect of performance management, and that's motivation.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What makes people tick?
Right.
What motivates employees to go above and beyond?
Yeah.
To be, truly engaged in their work?
This is a question that has fascinated, psychologists and business leaders for decades.
Right.
And there's no simple answer. What motivates one person might not motivate another.
Right.
But there are some key theories that can kind of shed light on the drivers of human behavior.
Okay, let's dive into those theories. I'm always fascinated by like the science behind motivation.
Well, one of the most well-known theories is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This was developed by the psychologist Abraham Maslow back in the 1940s. And it suggests that, humans have this hierarchy of needs, and it starts with those basic physiological needs like food, water, shelter, and then it moves up to those higher level needs like self-actualization. And that's essentially about fulfilling your potential and living a meaningful life.
So it's like a pyramid with those most basic needs at the bottom and then the more complex needs at the top.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you need to satisfy those lower level needs before you can even begin to think about those higher level needs.
That makes sense. If you're worried about like, where your next meal is coming from, if you don't feel safe in your environment, you're probably not going to be too concerned with, pursuing your passions or making a difference in the world.
Exactly. You need to feel secure and comfortable before you can really focus on anything else. And as each level of needs is met, then that next level becomes a motivator.
Okay. So once your like, basic needs are met, then you might be motivated by, the need for safety and security. Once those needs are met, then you're motivated by, the need for social connection and belonging and so on, kind of up the pyramid.
Exactly. And in the workplace, Maslow's theory suggests that employees need to feel like their basic needs are being met.
Yeah.
So things like fair pay, safe working conditions, job security, before they can really be motivated by those higher level needs like recognition, achievement, and opportunities for growth.
So if you want to create a highly motivated workforce, you need to start by creating this foundation of security and well-being.
Absolutely. Now, another important theory is Herzberg's two-factor theory, also known as the motivation hygiene theory.
Yeah.
This theory was developed by psychologist Friedrich Herzberg in the 1950s. And it suggests that there are actually two sets of factors that influence job satisfaction and motivation.
Okay.
They're called hygiene factors and motivators.
What's the difference between the two?
So hygiene factors are things like, company policies, supervision, working conditions, salary, relationships with colleagues. These factors, they don't necessarily motivate employees, But if they're absent or inadequate, they can lead to dissatisfaction and demotivation.
Okay, so they're kind of like the foundation of a house. Like, you might not notice them if they're there, but if they're missing or crumbling, the whole house is going to be unstable.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
Motivators, on the other hand, those are the factors that actually drive motivation and job satisfaction.
Okay.
And these are things like achievement, recognition, responsibility, the work itself, and opportunities for growth and advancement.
So hygiene factors are about preventing
hmm
dissatisfaction, while motivators are about creating satisfaction.
Exactly. And Herzberg argued that to truly motivate employees, you need to focus on those motivators, not just the hygiene factors.
So it's not enough to just offer like a good salary and decent working conditions.
Right.
You need to create opportunities for those employees to feel that sense of accomplishment, to feel like their work is meaningful, and to have the chance to learn and grow.
Precisely. And this leads us to another really important concept: intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation.
I've heard those terms before, but I'm not sure I totally understand the difference. Can you break that down?
Sure. So intrinsic motivation, it comes from within.
Okay.
It's the drive to do something because it's personally rewarding or enjoyable or even meaningful. So
Mhm.
think about your hobbies or activities that you do just for the pure joy of it.
Like playing an instrument or
Yeah.
writing or volunteering.
Right.
Like, you do those things because they're intrinsically motivating.
Exactly.
You don't need, any external rewards or pressures to do them.
Right. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, it comes from external factors. It's the drive to do something to get a reward or to avoid a punishment.
Okay, so like studying for a test to get a good grade or working overtime to earn a bonus.
Exactly. Now, in the workplace, both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, they both play a role.
Hmm.
But research suggests that intrinsic motivation, that's a more powerful and sustainable driver of performance.
So if you want to create a highly motivated workforce, you need to find ways to tap into that intrinsic motivation.
Precisely. And that means creating a work environment that's challenging, that's engaging, and that's meaningful.
Hmm.
It means giving employees opportunities to learn, to grow, and to make a real contribution.
And it means recognizing and rewarding those efforts in a way that's authentic and meaningful to them.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about another really crucial element of performance management: goal setting.
Okay, we already touched on this a little bit with management by objectives,
Mhm.
but I'm eager to kind of explore it further. Goal setting is something that I personally struggle with. Like, I often set really vague goals, or I get overwhelmed and just kind of give up before I even really get started.
You're not alone. Goal setting is a skill,
Yeah.
and it takes practice, but it's an incredibly powerful tool for achieving success, both in your personal and your professional life.
So what's the key to setting effective goals?
Right.
What are some strategies that actually work?
Well, one of the most widely used frameworks is the SMART goals method. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Okay, I've heard of SMART goals, but I've never really understood like how to apply them.
Right.
Can you break that down a little bit?
Sure. So let's start with specific.
Okay.
A specific goal is it's clearly defined and it leaves no room for ambiguity. So instead of saying, I want to be more productive,
Right.
a specific goal would be I want to complete 5 tasks on my to-do list every day.
So it's about getting really clear on what you want to achieve, no vague or wishy-washy statements.
Exactly. Now, measurable, that means that the goal can be tracked and quantified. So you need to be able to see your progress and know whether you're on track to achieve your goal. So if your goal is to lose weight, you need to specify how much weight you want to lose and by when.
Okay, so you can actually measure whether or not you're being successful.
Right.
What about achievable?
An achievable goal is one that's challenging but realistic. It's important to set goals that stretch you, but not so much that they become, demotivating or overwhelming.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between ambition and feasibility.
Exactly. Now, a relevant goal is one that aligns with your values, your priorities, and your overall objectives. It's a goal that's meaningful to you and contributes to your bigger picture.
So it's not just about setting any old goal.
Right.
It's about setting goals that matter to you and that actually move you closer to where you want to be.
Exactly. And finally, time-bound means that the goal has a deadline. And this creates a sense of urgency and accountability, and it helps you stay focused and motivated.
Okay, so instead of saying, like, I want to learn a new language, a time-bound goal would be, I want to be able to hold a basic conversation in Spanish by the end of the year.
That's a great example.
Okay.
Setting SMART goals is a really excellent way to set yourself up for success. But it's also important to remember that goals are not set in stone.
Okay.
They can and should be adjusted as needed. Life happens, priorities change, and sometimes we just need to reevaluate our goals and make adjustments.
Yeah, that's reassuring. It kind of takes the pressure off of feeling like you have to get it like perfect from the start.
Exactly. Goal setting is a dynamic process, and it's not just about achieving that end goal. It's about the journey and the lessons you learn along the way.
Speaking of journeys, let's talk about professional development. What are some effective strategies for continuously learning and growing in your career?
So professional development is really essential for staying relevant and competitive in today's rapidly changing work environment. It's about continuously expanding your skills, your knowledge, your abilities, and that helps you enhance your career prospects and also your personal fulfillment.
So it's about being proactive and taking, ownership of your own career growth. But with so many options out there, online courses and workshops and conferences and certifications, it can be overwhelming to even know where to start.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the hype and jump into whatever's trending without really thinking about, what you need to learn or how it aligns with your career goals.
So what's a good starting point? How do you even figure out like what skills you should be developing?
One really effective strategy is to conduct what's called a skills gap analysis.
What does that involve?
So it's essentially a process of comparing your current skills and knowledge to the skills and knowledge that are required for your desired role or career path.
Okay.
And it helps you identify those areas where you need to develop or enhance your expertise.
So it's like creating a roadmap for your professional growth. You figure out where you want to go, and then you map out the skills and knowledge you need to get there.
Exactly. And once you've identified those skills gaps, you can start exploring different development options. So formal education and training programs, those can provide structured learning experiences and even industry-recognized credentials.
And this could include anything from, those online courses and workshops to university degrees and professional certifications.
Exactly. And, informal learning experiences, they can be just as valuable.
Okay.
They offer flexibility, affordability, and opportunities for self-directed learning.
So those could include things like reading industry publications, attending conferences and networking events, joining professional organizations, or even seeking out mentorship from experienced professionals in your field.
Yeah, all great examples. And don't underestimate the power of on-the-job learning.
Okay.
Taking on new challenges, volunteering for projects outside of your comfort zone, and even seeking feedback from your colleagues and supervisors. That can provide invaluable learning experiences.
So it's about being proactive, seeking out those opportunities for growth, and embracing that mindset of continuous learning.
Exactly. And when you're pursuing professional development, it's really important to set those clear goals and create a plan. What specific skills do you want to develop? What resources will you need? What time frame will you work with?
So it's about approaching your development with the same level of like intentionality and strategy that you would apply to any other important goal.
Right. Now, let's talk about something that's often overlooked in performance management, and that's the importance of recognition and rewards.
I'm interested in this one because we all want to be, recognized for our hard work and our achievements. But it seems like companies often get this wrong. They either like go overboard with really generic praise, or they completely neglect to acknowledge people's contributions.
You're right. Recognition and rewards, they're powerful motivators, but they need to be done thoughtfully and authentically.
So how do you do it right? Like, what are some effective strategies for recognizing and rewarding employees in a way that's meaningful and impactful?
Well, one of the most important things is to be specific and timely. So instead of just saying, good job, provide details about what the employee did well and how it impacted the team or the organization.
So instead of saying, you're a great team player, you might say, I really appreciate how you stepped up to help your colleague meet that deadline. your willingness to go the extra mile made a huge difference.
Exactly. That kind of specific feedback, that's so much more meaningful because it tells the person exactly what they did well and how it made a difference.
Mhm.
And the same goes for rewards. It's not just about giving everyone the same bonus or a generic gift card. It's about finding rewards that are personally meaningful to the recipient. Some people might be motivated by financial incentives, while others might value opportunities for growth or recognition or work-life balance. It's about understanding what makes each individual tick and tailoring those rewards accordingly.
And it's also about being fair and consistent. Right?
Absolutely.
Like employees need to feel like they're being treated equitably
Yeah.
and that their contributions are valued.
Yeah, fairness and consistency, they're crucial for building trust and for fostering that positive work environment.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in terms of like individual performance management, but what about the bigger picture? How does company culture impact performance management?
Well, company culture is really the shared values, the beliefs, and the behaviors that kind of shape the way that people work together in an organization.
Oh,
It's the unwritten rules that guide decision making, communication, and interaction.
so it's like the personality of the company,
Hmm.
like the vibe you get when you walk in the door.
Exactly. And company culture can have a profound impact on performance management.
In what way?
Well, for example, a company with a highly competitive culture, they might focus on individual performance and reward those top performers. While a company with a more collaborative culture, they might emphasize teamwork and shared goals.
So the approach to performance management needs to kind of align with the overall culture of the company.
Exactly. And company culture can also influence the way that feedback is given and received. So in a culture that values, open communication, feedback might be given freely and directly.
Hmm.
While in a culture that's more hierarchical or formal, feedback might be given more cautiously and indirectly.
So it's important to kind of be aware of the cultural norms and expectations when you're giving and receiving feedback.
And company culture can also impact employee motivation. So in a culture that values, learning and growth, employees might be intrinsically motivated to develop their skills and take on new challenges. While in a culture that's more focused on, short-term results, employees might be more extrinsically motivated by those rewards and incentives.
So creating a positive and supportive company culture is really essential for fostering a motivated and high-performing workforce.
Absolutely. And, company culture is not static. It can evolve over time, and it's influenced by factors like, leadership, industry trends, and even societal changes.
So it's important to like regularly assess and adjust your company culture to make sure that it's aligned with your values and your goals.
Right. Now, let's talk about something that no one enjoys dealing with, but it's kind of an inevitable part of performance management, and that's addressing performance issues.
Ugh, yeah, this is something I struggle with personally. Like I hate confrontation, and I often avoid having those difficult conversations.
It's natural to feel uncomfortable addressing those performance issues. But it's important to remember that those conversations, they're not about being, punitive or making someone feel bad.
Right.
It's really about helping the employee improve and ensuring that everyone is contributing to the team's success.
So how do you approach those conversations in a way that's constructive and supportive rather than confrontational or accusatory?
Well, the first step is to really identify that root cause of the problem.
Okay.
Is it, a lack of skills or knowledge? Is it a motivational issue? Is it a personal problem that's impacting their work performance?
Okay, so once you understand the underlying issue, then you can start to develop a plan to address it.
Exactly. And it's important to involve the employee in this process. Don't just dictate solutions. Have an open and honest conversation about the issue, listen to their perspective, and work together to develop a plan that's mutually agreeable.
So it's about collaboration, not confrontation.
Precisely. And when you're addressing performance issues, it's really important to be specific and to provide concrete examples of, the behavior or the performance that needs to be improved. Don't just say you need to be more reliable.
Mm.
Provide specific instances of when they weren't reliable and how that impacted the team.
Okay, so it's about like giving actionable feedback, not just vague criticisms.
Exactly. And it's also important to set clear expectations for improvement. What specific actions do they need to take? By when? how will progress be measured?
It's about like creating this clear roadmap for improvement.
Right, and it's crucial to provide support and resources to help them succeed.
Hmm.
So this might include training or mentoring or coaching. It might also involve, adjusting their workload or their responsibilities to better suit their skills and abilities.
So it's not just about like pointing out the problem.
Right.
It's about working with that employee to find solutions.
Exactly. And it's really important to document the conversation and the agreed upon plan. This provides a record of the discussion and it helps to ensure accountability.
Okay, and if despite, your best efforts, those performance issues persist, then you might need to consider more formal disciplinary action,
Right.
like, a written warning or even termination.
hmm But it's important to approach these situations with empathy and fairness. Remember, you're dealing with a human being who, might be struggling. And even if termination becomes necessary, it's important to handle it with dignity and respect.
Now, let's kind of shift gears again and talk about a topic that's becoming increasingly relevant in today's workplace.
Mm.
Performance management in remote and hybrid work environments.
Right. This is a really fascinating area because, the rise of remote and hybrid work has brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to performance management.
It's definitely changed the game. How do you effectively manage performance when you're not, physically present with your team?
One key is to establish those clear communication channels and expectations.
Okay.
When you're not seeing your team members face to face on a regular basis, it's really crucial to over communicate and make sure everyone's, on the same page.
So it's about being proactive and intentional with your communication.
Exactly. And it's important to leverage technology to facilitate performance management. There are countless tools available that can help you track goals and provide feedback and monitor progress remotely.
And this could include, anything from project management software and video conferencing platforms to online learning platforms and performance management systems.
Exactly. And it's important to adapt your performance management practices to the unique challenges of remote and hybrid work. So, for example, you might need to adjust your expectations for availability and responsiveness, recognizing that employees might have different work schedules and personal commitments when they're working remotely.
It's about being flexible and understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also crucial to foster that sense of community and connection among remote and hybrid team members.
Okay.
So this might involve, scheduling regular virtual team meetings or creating online social spaces for informal interaction or even organizing in-person team building events when possible.
It's about finding creative ways to maintain those social connections and build a strong team spirit even when you're not, physically together.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about another trend that's shaping the future of performance management, and that is the use of data and analytics.
This is an area that's gaining a lot of attention lately.
Wow.
How are data and analytics being used to enhance performance management?
Data and analytics can provide such valuable insights into employee performance.
Okay.
They can help organizations identify trends, patterns, and areas for improvement.
So instead of relying solely on like subjective observations and opinions,
Right.
you can use data to objectively assess performance and make more informed decisions.
Exactly. And data can be used to track a wide range of performance metrics, from productivity and sales figures to customer satisfaction ratings and employee engagement scores.
And this data can be used to identify, those top performers or to pinpoint areas where training is needed, or even to measure the effectiveness of different performance management interventions.
Exactly. And with the rise of what's called people analytics,
Okay.
organizations are using data to gain a much deeper understanding of their workforce.
Okay.
So they're identifying those factors that drive engagement, retention, and performance.
So it's about using data to create. Welcome back to the deep dive.
We're nearing the end of our exploration of performance management, and it's honestly, it's been quite a journey.
It really has. We've covered so much from those traditional methods like appraisals and MBO to that shift towards more continuous feedback and the role of data and analytics. And we've also talked about like the human side of performance management. That importance of motivation, clear communication, and creating that culture that really supports growth and development.
Mm-hmm.
And you posed a great question at the end of the last part. asking our listeners what they thought was the most important element of effective performance management.
It's a complex question. There's no one right answer, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, after everything we've discussed, I keep coming back to this idea of clarity. I think clear communication is like absolutely foundational to any successful performance management system.
I couldn't agree more. Without clear communication, everything else just falls apart.
Right.
Think about it. If employees don't understand what's expected of them, how can they possibly meet those expectations?
Exactly. And if managers aren't giving, specific, actionable feedback, how can employees know what to improve?
Yeah.
It's like trying to navigate a maze in the dark. You're just, stumbling around, hoping you find your way.
Right. Yeah. Clarity is essential for setting goals, providing feedback, delegating tasks, and resolving conflicts. It creates the sense of alignment, accountability, and trust.
And I think clarity also extends to the bigger picture.
Yeah.
The company's vision, its values.
Hmm.
When employees understand the company's mission and how their work contributes to that, they're more likely to be, engaged and motivated.
That's a great point. It's about connecting the dots between that individual performance and that organizational success. When people feel like their work has meaning and purpose, they're so much more likely to go the extra mile.
And we've talked a lot about what companies can do to improve performance management, but what about like individuals? What can we do to take ownership of our own performance and development?
That's a crucial question because ultimately performance management, it isn't something that's done to you, it's something you actively participate in and shape.
So it's not just about showing up and doing what you're told. It's about taking initiative and seeking feedback and constantly looking for ways to learn and grow.
Exactly. And that might involve, seeking out new challenges, volunteering for projects outside of your comfort zone, or even asking for additional responsibilities. It's about demonstrating your willingness to learn and to contribute.
And it's about being proactive about your own development.
Yeah.
Don't wait for your manager to tell you what skills to learn or what courses to take. Identify those areas for growth yourself and create a plan to address them.
That's right. Take ownership of your career trajectory. Don't just sit back and wait for those opportunities to come to you. Seek them out. Network with people in your field, attend industry events, and stay up to date on the latest trends.
And remember, learning isn't just about formal education or training. It's about being curious and asking questions and constantly seeking out new knowledge and perspectives.
Yeah, one of the most effective ways to learn is to simply observe those around you.
Wow.
Who are the top performers in your organization?
Hmm.
What are they doing differently? What can you learn from them?
It's like having this built-in mentorship program. You can learn so much just by paying attention to the people who are really excelling in their roles.
Right. And don't be afraid to ask for feedback. It can be intimidating, I know, but it's one of the most valuable gifts you can receive. It helps you identify your blind spots in those areas for improvement.
And remember, feedback isn't always about criticism. It's also about recognizing your strengths and celebrating those successes. Don't just focus on what you need to improve. Acknowledge what you're doing well and give yourself credit for your accomplishments.
Yeah, that's so important. We often get so caught up in that cycle of striving for perfection that we forget to appreciate, how far we've come. Celebrate your wins, no matter how small they may seem.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive into performance management, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought.
Performance management, when it's done right, it's about so much more than just evaluating performance.
Right.
It's about empowering people to reach their full potential.
It's about creating that culture of continuous learning, growth, and improvement. It's about fostering a sense of purpose and meaning in the workplace.
And it's about recognizing that everyone has something valuable to contribute.
So as you go back to your work and your life, I encourage you to think about these principles we've discussed. How can you apply them to improve your own performance? How can you create a more supportive and empowering environment for those around you?
Performance management, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's an ongoing journey of discovery, adaptation, and growth.
So keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep striving to be the best version of yourself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into performance management.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.